Thank you very much. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. I was a student of poetry before I was a student of Scripture. I am a student of both. I learned that poem as a child. I studied that poem in college as an English major. I was an English major. It gets better. I was an English major with a concentration in creative writing. So I got the question, what do you plan to do with that? I don't know. But if I should ever have the opportunity to stand on stage in a beautiful concert hall, in a college I could never have gotten into, I will say this. That poem is not really, I think, about a road less traveled. As the poem goes, both roads in that yellow wood are really about the same. They show similar wear. They equally lay in leaves. The poem is, I think, about vocation found. Vocation is rooted in a Latin word that means a call or a summons. You've heard it said that ministry is a calling, that ministers are called. The implication is that ministers are called to ministry by God. There are more understandings of that than there are people in this room. The way I see it, who would choose to spend every weekend of her working life working? Unless if she were compelled and convicted by something greater than herself. So ministry is a calling, sure. But a calling to what? Early on, I thought of it as a call to faithfulness. I was supposed to uphold a tradition. I was supposed to inspire faith, plant little seeds of belief, nurture those seeds, nurture the spiritual life. I still think that. But I think there's much more to tell about faithfulness. If belief is interior, faithfulness is outward expression. If belief is personal, faithfulness is interpersonal. If belief is private, faithfulness is public. In my work as a pastor, I celebrate the ways that inner conviction and social concern and social action inform one another. I suppose there are a few of you here who see ordained ministry as the road not taken, as a career path less traveled by. I don't disagree. I think your eyesight is good. But for me, the pastoral life is vocation found. And vocation found is, in Frost's words, that thing that makes all the difference. To a poet, finding the right word makes all the difference. To a professor or a dean of a residential college, reaching that sometimes hard-to-reach student makes all the difference. So what makes all the difference to me as a pastor? It can be summed up in a single word: with. With may sound to you a little wispy and weak. It is not. With is compassion. With is solidarity. And with is an important building block of healthy community. It's why I'm here. And it's a big part, I think, of why we're all here. As a boy, I read the Frog and Toad books by Arnold Lobel. I liked them okay, even if Toad was terminally crabby. There's one story I remember still. It's called Down the Hill. It begins with Frog going over to Toad's house. "Winter is wonderful. Come outside and play," Frog says. "Blah," says Toad. See what I mean? Crabby. Frog helps himself inside. He puts a hat and scarf on Toad, and out they go. Frog says, "Let's take my sled down that hill." "Not me," says Toad. "Oh, don't be afraid. I will be with you," says Frog. "You sit in front, I'll sit in back. We'll go down the hill together." And down the hill they go. Not long into their run, they hit a bump, and Frog gets tossed from his sled. So there's Toad careening down this hill. "I'm so glad you're here, Frog," says Toad. "I could not steer this sled without you, Frog," says Toad. Eventually, Toad realizes that Frog isn't on the sled. And before he wipes out, he screams, "I am all alone." Okay, so he has a point. But I've always thought he misses the bigger point. He isn't alone. Frog is with him. Because that's what friendship is like. That's what pastoral ministry is like, too. It's about being with. The summer before my last year in divinity school, I worked as a student chaplain at a large inner-city hospital. Not 10 minutes into my first day as on-call chaplain, my beeper beeped. I had literally just put it on my belt. I called the number. It was a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit. She told me that there was a severely premature baby being kept alive at her parents' request until she could be baptized. In other words, get over here. So I went. I walked onto the unit, and this large family turned to me. They looked at me, I looked at them. I'm pretty sure I wasn't what they were looking for. No clerical collar. The parents spoke only Spanish, so I had to dust off conjugations and vocab and assure them that I could do this. I wasn't Roman Catholic, I'm not a priest, I wasn't ordained, but I could baptize their girl. They nodded and called me Padre, and I didn't correct them. The time came for me to do what I came to do, and this circle of nurses and doctors working so well together around the baby let me in. And I baptized that little girl. My first baptism. And moments later, she was pronounced dead. That was hard. Most of all for the family, of course. The nurse who called me thought so too. And she walked with me down this long hall into a private family room where the family was then gathered. And for a long time, she sat there. I can't tell you one word she said, but she was there. She was with the family, with me. She showed gentleness and compassion. She gave a hug. She held a hand. She was herself moved to tears. This was a veteran nurse. She had seen this kind of thing before. This was her job. And in the process of all of this, she was teaching me something important about my job. She was with them. And I can tell you, it made a difference. In the summer of 2003, I led my first youth group summer service trip. I took a bunch of teenagers from my church in Connecticut down to Lee County, Virginia, the westernmost county in that state, and we worked in this coal-mined mountain town. For a week, we dug this drainage ditch, 30, 40-foot drainage ditch behind a house that was perched on the bottom of a very steep slope. And we put in a wheelchair ramp, and we painted a little girl's room purple, her dream color. And in the course of that week, something happened. Those teenagers, who I knew, and they were really teenagers, those teenagers and those families flew into each other's hearts quickly, deeply, profoundly. They worked shoulder to shoulder, not only with one another, but with the families too. They swapped stories. They laughed a lot. It was a picture not of charity, but of solidarity. That ditch and wheelchair ramp and purple room took on new meaning. These were projects we were doing for people we liked, and for some reason liked us back. The man who owned that house at the bottom of that mountain was about my age. He had been injured at work and was out of work. So he was around, and he would come around when we took our water breaks, and we would shoot hoops, play horse, talk a little trash. He wore his Yankees hat, I wore my Red Sox hat. So back in 2003, he had a little more trash to talk. But 16 months later, there came a glorious, victorious night in New England. The next day, there was a message on our answering machine. The Virginian gentleman calling to congratulate me on our World Series victory. So my wife Gwen walks into the room and she says, "Who was that? Who called?" I tried to tell her with a lump in my throat. It makes a difference. So Gwen and our 3 girls and I, we moved to town here a few years back. One of the first nights we were here, we ate at the Friday night community supper at our new church. Our reasons for going were far more practical than pious. Okay, the moving truck hadn't arrived yet. So we had a little food, but nothing to eat it on. So we walked into Fellowship Hall, into a room full of people and food and piano music. I remember a local restaurant put on that meal, a full Thanksgiving spread for 150, 200 people. I remember the women's ice hockey team here at Middlebury College served that meal. And I remember thinking, man, this is like no soup kitchen I have ever seen. There's a reason for that. It's not a soup kitchen. It's community supper. Community supper. It took me a little while to get it, but I got it. That meal, like the community lunches during the week, they are about food, of course, but that program is about something more. It's about people coming together. It's about neighbor talking to neighbor. It's about the rewriting of the definition of neighborhood every week. It's about welcoming that one who feels dislocated from the socket of what community even means. The ringmaster of that Friday night meal is awesome. She makes every volunteer feel important. She makes every guest, she calls them guests, feel important. She knows most of their names, and if she doesn't yet, she will. And she'll tell you if you volunteer there, the most important thing you'll do all night is sit down and talk with the guests. That isn't always easy to do. But easy is way overrated. When you do sit, you meet someone with a sense of humor. Or you meet someone who has the same joys and concerns you do. Or you meet someone else who's really alone. Alone in a way that stays with you. Just last week, I was talking with someone, and mid-conversation, mid-sentence, he stopped and said, "This is the first real conversation I've had all day." It was 6 o'clock in the evening. When you hear that, you realize why you're there and why you're here. Why we are all here. It's about being with. Frederick Buechner is a writer and theologian. He lives in Vermont. He has this to say about vocation. He says it's where our great joy and the world's great need meet. From what I've seen of the world, there is a great need to be with one another. And from what I know about with, it's one of the greatest joys to be found. When we step outside the circle of our own concerns and needs and stuff, and we meet and we really see and we serve and we tend to the needs of others, it makes all the difference. See, the truth is, there are many more than 2 roads diverging in that yellow wood. There are so many expressions of vocation, so many callings worthy of that name. We are made to do and be so many different things. But the common denominator that we share is the challenge and the privilege of being with.